run the ball last week against Carolina for 300-some yards. Today, you can't run the ball to save your life.
Vanderbilt.
Jacob Eason goes for 300 yards. Well, we lose. Special teams, piss poor. Clock management, piss poor. The defense played good, but it's Vanderbilt. Hey, good morning. Yep, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, live for you on LouTube today. Yep, thanks for watching. You know what I want to talk about today? I want to talk about the 5 power conferences. In particular, which one right now is the worst? Everyone always debates who's the best conference, right? You hear it all the time. SEC's been in there a lot lately in that debate. ACC was in there last year. The Big Ten tried to be in there last year until the bowl season started. Big 12 and Pac-12, I never really hear anybody make a case for those two being the best conference. But I do hear cases being made for the other 3 all the time that they're the best conference. But that horse has been beat, right? But no one ever talks about what conference is the worst. Now, I'm not talking about, in this video anyway, anything that happened last year or any year previous. This is only what I've seen this year. Okay? So, keep that in mind. So, it doesn't matter that Washington made the college football playoff last year for the purposes of this video, and I'm just throwing that out as an example. That's not a shot at Washington. Just throwing that out as an example, okay? Let's start with the SEC. Who's the worst team in the SEC? Missouri, right? Not even close, is it? I don't think Missouri... If Missouri wins an SEC game this year, it will be a big upset, right? They're expected to lose. They're really, really bad. They could be the worst Power 5 team in America this year. There's a couple of other teams that could give them a run for their money, sure. But Missouri is really, really bad. So they're at the bottom of the SEC for comparative purposes. They're also the only team in the SEC with a losing record so far. So the SEC, one team with a losing record. They've got 2 teams in the top 5 of every major poll right now. Georgia and Alabama. Hard to make an argument, I think, for the SEC to be the worst conference when they've got 2 of the top 5 teams, right? Seems like it. That Georgia and Alabama, of course. You got Florida sitting at 1 loss. They haven't looked very impressive. I will be the first to admit they got run over in a non-con game against Michigan. But they're sitting at 1 loss. Auburn probably has the best loss of anyone in the country, right? A 1-touchdown loss to Clemson on the road at night. So, unless you're just wanting to talk trash about Auburn, you can't call them a terrible team, can you? The ACC. Well, they have 4 teams with a losing record. The most of any conference. The most any other conference has is 2. So the ACC has twice as many teams with a losing record as any other conference does. Who's their best team? Clemson. Clemson beat the 3rd best SEC team, if you're going by rankings right now. Any poll you look at. It's Alabama's the highest rated SEC team. Georgia's the 2nd highest rated. Auburn the 3rd highest rated. Clemson, their best team, has a 1-touchdown win over the 3rd best SEC team. And that was a home game for Clemson at night. Not saying that's good or bad, just stating the facts here. Who's the 2nd best ACC team? This gets hard to figure out, doesn't it? Miami's undefeated. They haven't played anybody. They play Florida State this week. So next week, they still haven't played anybody. Florida State, terrible. Bottom half of the ACC, without question. Who else would you consider? So Clemson is the only great team, I think, right, in the ACC. Good teams right now would be Miami. Is Louisville a good team? They only have the one loss, right? Okay, we'll call them good. Miami good. Is NC State good? Well, NC State beat FSU, right? They only have one loss. But guess who it's to? South Carolina, which is probably the 10th, 11th, or 12th best team in the SEC. At worst, NC State is maybe the 5th best team in the ACC. At worst. Okay? If you want to talk about Clemson, Miami, Louisville, if you want to put Virginia Tech ahead of NC State, okay. So what, they're the 5th? They lost to South Carolina, a terrible team. But they've got the, in my opinion, #1 team in Clemson. So that means something, right? What about the Big Ten, though? Everybody in the Big Ten riding the Ohio State horse, right? Only team in the Big Ten to do anything in the last 20 years, right? Well, they got blown out by Oklahoma, a Big 12 team. And we'll get to that next, I guess, the Big 12. So who's the best team in the Big Ten? Is it Ohio State? Is it Penn State? Is it Michigan? Is it Wisconsin? Those are all at least good teams. I'll give you that. And I'll even put Ohio State in the good teams. So you got Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, Penn State. I would say those are all good teams. One or two may be elite by season's end or great. Right now, none of those teams really have any exciting wins, do they? Penn State really hasn't beat anybody that made you say, wow. Nor has Wisconsin. Michigan beat Florida. Florida's what? The 4th or the 5th best team in the SEC? Michigan, they're the highest ranked Big Ten team. 2nd highest maybe behind Penn State. So at worst right now, Michigan is the 2nd best Big Ten team. Lost to the, what, 4th, maybe 5th best SEC team. And then you have Rutgers in the Big Ten, a complete dumpster fire. They're right up there with Missouri as one of the worst teams in the land. So yeah, y'all got some bad teams too. Indiana. Who else? Minnesota, they ain't any good. Iowa, they're going to win 7 games like they normally do. Anyway, the Big 12. Now, I'll tell you right now, the Big 12 has been my pick for worst conference in America over the last couple of years. Why? Well, Oklahoma's been really the only team with a pulse there. Yeah, Baylor and, what was it, TCU had that one exciting year where they were both up close to the top 5 but fell out at the end. Texas has been in the toilet for a decade. You know, that really hurts the Big 12. I was high on Oklahoma State. You know, they get beat by TCU. So you're trying to tell me TCU's an elite team? Or a great team? Oklahoma does have one of the best wins this year. One of the best wins. I'm not saying it's the best, but definitely one of the best wins at Ohio State. So I guess, are they the cream of the crop in the Big 12? What holds the Big 12 back, and I say this all the time, is defense, or lack thereof. They don't have any. You know, TCU tries to play defense. Oklahoma tries to play defense. The rest of the teams could care less. You know, all these games, 45-50, you know, 48-41, you know. Then they play a good non-conference team and, you know, can't score 20 points. Look at Kansas State versus Vandy for all the proof you need there. How many teams in the Big 12 scare good teams from other conferences? All right, start with Oklahoma. They beat Ohio State. So I would say right now, Oklahoma would be a good matchup with the best teams from the other conferences. I'll give credit there. Oklahoma State, I don't think so. Not after what I saw against TCU defensively. They just don't have what it takes, I don't think, to compete with the top couple of teams from each conference, especially from the SEC and maybe even the ACC. Clemson, I mean, you think Oklahoma State is going to score 40 or 30 or 40 points on Clemson? No. TCU, everybody high on them now from beating Oklahoma State. I'm not as high on TCU as some other people are. I'm higher on some teams than others, and I'm not as high as on other. You know, it just depends. I'm not a believer in TCU. A bad Georgia team beat them last year. Yeah, I know they're improved this year. Lots of teams get better from one year to the next. I don't know. I just feel like we've seen this movie before with teams like TCU or, like I mentioned, Baylor 1 year before, and you know, it just seems to crumble away. Not sure how many of the top couple of teams from other conferences TCU is beating. And then you got, of course, Texas, which is terrible. It's Iowa State in the Big 12, terrible. Kansas, perennially the worst Power 5 team in America, getting some competition this year from Mizzou. Pac-12. Not a single legitimate team in the Pac-12 this year. Not one, in my opinion. Washington, undefeated. Made the college football playoff last year. Got housed by Alabama. Game was never close. 34-7, I think it was. Scored 50 points a game, week in and week out in the Pac-12. We've seen this script before with Oregon, you know. Washington, non-conference schedule this year. You're not going to, I mean, what... How can you judge Washington? How can you call Washington an elite team? They play Rutgers, Montana State, Fresno State, and 9 Pac-12 cupcakes. You know, the toughest game on their schedule, beginning of the year, looked like Stanford. Well, Stanford can't be any good because they got drugged by Southern Cal, and Southern Cal is just not a good team. And that doesn't make me happy to say that because I picked Southern Cal to make the college football playoff this year. Well, that's not happening. Sam Darnold has regressed this year. The dude's got more completions to the other team than he does his own. Washington State, they beat somebody the other day. They beat Southern Cal the other day. Now people are high on Washington State. Mike Leach giving press conferences talking about Bigfoot and E.T. and shit. I don't know what, I mean, what this, you know, you never know what's coming out of this guy's mouth. Most normal person on planet Earth, Mike Leach. Anybody really afraid to play Washington State? And, you know, the top teams from these other conferences? What do you think Alabama would do to Washington State, or Clemson, or Georgia, or Auburn, or Oklahoma, or Penn State, or Ohio State, or even Michigan? Well, what do you think these teams would do to Washington State? Any of those teams with a defense is going to shut Washington State down. I can tell you that right now. Offensively, Washington State's... How many points would Washington State, or Washington, either one for that matter, score on any of these teams that have top 10 defenses? Georgia, Auburn, Alabama, Clemson. Not very many. So, where does that leave us? Well, to me, it's not close. And I guess this is something I was wrong about in the preseason, but the Pac-12 is the worst conference in America. I don't think it's close. I really don't. I think they're the worst conference, top to bottom, all things considered. And I tried to do that. You consider the conference's best teams, you consider their worst teams, how many teams have losing records, you know, records against other Power 5 teams. I tried to consider all of that stuff. And I think the Pac-12 right now is the worst conference. I don't think it's close. If you make me pick right now, I would probably say Pac-12 is the worst, Big 12 is the next to worst, then the ACC, And then an argument could be made either way right now for the Big Ten or the SEC. I'm going to give the lean right now to the SEC based on what I saw from the Big Ten so far this year and last year in the bowl season. Your best team got hosed or housed, skull-drugged by Oklahoma, Ohio State. And you had a miserable bowl record last year. You know, like I said, Alabama, UGA, 2 teams in the top 5. Auburn, a 1-loss team. You know, they have the best loss of any 1-loss team in America with a 1-touchdown loss to Clemson. You compare that to the Big Ten. Ohio State already got humiliated by a non-con. That's not like that was a 1-possession loss. You just got creamed by Oklahoma. Michigan has the defense to compete against an elite team, but not the offense. Penn State is the most well-rounded and complete team and probably has one of the best, if not the best players in America in Saquon Barkley. I still think Penn State's the best team in the Big Ten. I could get proved wrong here coming up in the next few weeks when some of these teams start playing each other. But top to bottom, I would give a slight edge right now to the SEC. So the worst conference in America, Pac-12, followed very closely by a terrible Big 12. I have the ACC there next. Mainly because Florida State turned out so bad. They were expected to be a top 5 team this year and make the playoff, and they're just horrible. They got 1 win all year, and they barely beat Wake Forest. If you're telling me Louisville's the second best team, they got humiliated by Clemson. Like I said, the same Clemson that barely beat an Auburn team. If you're telling me NC State is the top 4 or 5 teams in the ACC, well, like I said, they got humiliated by South Carolina, which is a 10th or 11th best SEC team. So that put them 3rd. You can argue about the Big Ten and the SEC. I get it. That could go either way, honestly. I'm an SEC homer. Probably has something to do with it. I'm not going to deny it. I tried to lay out the facts for you best I could why I picked the SEC as #1. But no doubt at all, I don't think anybody would argue Pac-12 is the worst. Anyway, have a mediocre morning.